The next talk is World Scale Games, and to talk about it is none other from Google Cloud, Sahil, Sanan, and Malik.
Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Naman. I'm part of the Google Ads and Strategy team. I primarily work with gaming developers to help them take their app globally. We help them through insights and strategic market, and Sahil is part of the Google Cloud team who will be joining us for the second leg of this presentation. It's great to see the energy at IGDC, and today's session will be focusing on what the gaming landscape this year is. What are the games to build? One of the questions that we often get is, where's the money? What are the subgenres that are working? How can we grow our games, not just in India, but overall in the world? One of the key things that kind of always comes to mind is India does have the talent, India does have the developer ecosystem, right? In fact, we have over 1.5 million developers currently developing apps and games across India. In fact, 5% of all applications listed on App Store, the Google Play Store, are through Indian publishers. But when you switch this, you will notice that only 11% of those apps are games. Rest, all of these apps are non-gaming tools and utilities, which is primarily a big developer ecosystem that we have. The other key gap that we notice is that we create first for Android, which is absolutely great, but there's a gap of creating iOS applications, which also helps your application scale for different markets, especially the Western markets where iOS is more prevalent. Now, let's move on to the gaming landscape. We all know gaming is where the money is. We've all seen so many games. We're all users ourselves. Gaming is set to grow at 8% CAGR over the next 4 odd years till 2027. In fact, nearly 170,000 games are downloaded every minute on both App Store and the Apple Store as well. And the projected revenue is $376 billion by 2027. When we look at the revenue, not just downloads, we see that the billion-dollar club, and this is something that we've seen over the last decade or so. We saw pretty much Candy Crush being the first one to be able to lead $1 billion. We've seen until 2020, there was not a single non-gaming app that reached the billion-dollar club. It was Tinder was the first one, and now we have YouTube, we have TikTok who've reached that milestone as well. But the projected billion-dollar clubs will be all gaming apps over the next 5 years as well. The majority question when we talk to all of these developers is, we know gaming has a lot of potential, we know gaming has a lot of money involved, but what to build and where to build, right? And that's what Sahil and I'll try to answer today for you. The hardest game to build has always been core IP, and casual is the one where we see a lot of developers creating games, right? We've seen Puzzle come out of India, we've seen a lot of Match 3, we've seen board games come out of India. And the good news is that casual game is growing at 12% year over year, whereas the core gaming has declined year over year from a revenue perspective, right? But within casual, there are hundreds of subgenres. What is the subgenre that works the most? We looked at 4 different parameters. We looked at the genre, so we looked at growing verticals, right? Within the larger category of casual, hyper-casual, what is the subcategory that's growing? We looked at monetization. We looked at both in-app purchases and ads revenue, because we've seen developers being able to have a hybrid monetization are the more successful developers. We've seen the size of the market. Where does the downloads drive from? We all know India is one of the biggest downloads market. But apart from that, we also looked at the ease of development, how easy it is to create those games. And there's one particular category that we all know, we hear about it a lot, and that's the puzzle category, right? Puzzle category has seen over 1 billion downloads this year alone. They're easier to build compared to core. They're growing at nearly 25% year over year. And it has one of the highest ad-funded or ads revenue in place. But within puzzle, what are the subcategories that are growing? There are 3 subcategories that I'll talk about, and the first is Match 3. We've all seen the likes of Royal Match and Candy Crush become world leaders, become the billion-dollar applications that they are today. but Match 3 alone contributes 800 million downloads and has about 15% ads revenue to an 85% in-app purchase revenue. And that's a very strong monetization model to go after. In fact, the top 5 markets contribute to only 20% downloads but 70% revenue. And we'll talk a bit more about markets shortly. But the US, Japan, Great Britain, Germany, Korea, these are the leading markets for almost all subcategories in gaming. And to get to these markets is the most critical bit to succeed. The fast-growing markets is, of course, India. Along with that, there's Indonesia and Brazil that sees both a mix of revenue as well as downloads. After Match 3, the second biggest subcategory that we recommend developers developing games is block puzzle. We've seen the likes of Tetris, we've seen the likes of Q Block and block puzzle itself. With an annual downloads of 330%, it has 99% ads revenue. Fairly easy to make, fairly easy to monetize as well. The top 5 markets are again pretty much similar, the big 5 gaming markets, whereas Brazil is one of the fastest growing markets for block puzzle as well. And the last recommendation within the larger puzzle category is idle clickers. Again, we have some great names over here with Golden Goblins, with Idle Lumber, and this is one of, again, the fastest growing subcategories, but has a very equal hybrid monetization model of both ads and in-app purchases, makes a very good sustainable business for the developer community. The top 5 markets here are again the same 5 big markets, whereas Brazil, Indonesia, Mexico, so LATAM has been contributing very significantly to the growth of these markets. The next question, and we've spoken a little bit about this in the previous slides, is what are the top markets, right? Where do we go for the applications that we've already created? India is great for downloads. India is great because no one understands our market better. We heard a lot about culturalization yesterday from the VCs. We heard a lot about localization. But it's also important to note that the revenue is generated from outside India. The eCPMs as well as the in-app purchases potential is 10x of markets outside India. US remains the largest market, but according to our prediction, China is going to overtake in terms of revenue very shortly. The good news is China has recently opened its own gaming ecosystem to foreign publishers. So now you can create your games for the China ecosystem as well. Whereas the big markets, Japan, South Korea, continue to be big in terms of revenue as well as gamers available. As you notice, India is not in the top 10, but the way India's ecosystem is growing, it is a long-term strategic bet for the next 10 years that India will be among the top 10 gaming markets from a revenue standpoint as well. In terms of the size of the market, it was very clear US, China, Japan, Korea, but where is the growth coming from? Where are we seeing countries that are downloading more games, spending more in revenue? And that's 2 regions that come out instantly. One is the MENA region, so you have the North Africa, Middle East region, and the second is Latin America, primarily driven by Brazil and Mexico. We're seeing 16% incremental growth that is expected in the next 2 years from these 2 regions, whereas MENA contributes 7.1 billion and the remaining 8.5 odd billion comes from the LATAM market. The next big thing where we see a lot of developers ask questions is Japan and Korea. Even though their IPs are really strong and their app quality is really high, these 2 markets are critical for Indian gaming developers to crack. And the key to these 2 markets has always been to be able to localize for that, to build very, very high quality applications for those 2 markets. The key to winning in these markets, and there are 4 key primary things that come to mind, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail about these 4 triggers. The first is localization, and we've spoken a lot about it, but localization is the #1 priority that we focus on. In fact, we mentioned it 3 times because that's how important it is for all our developers. We still see a lot of gaps when Indian developers advertise their applications in Brazil, in Mexico, in Japan, in Korea. The second is fast prototyping. The third is personalization. That's the future of gaming ecosystem, right? How is it catered to me as a gamer, as me as an individual? And the fourth is UX, user experience. Here are some examples of what we've seen work really well for some of the big gaming developers, right? We know how big Christmas, New Year, or the seasonality of Q4 in the US market is. And here's a great example of someone representing holidays as part of their UI. Second is personalizing and customizing currency, customizing the event stages to focus on that particular genre. And third, we spoke a little bit earlier in previous sessions as well as IP, creating something that's new, that's something that's niche, and something that's been built for you with influencer marketing or collaboration working really well. We've seen a lot of big gaming developers tie up with movie studios, tie up with artists across the world, and that's a great way for you to scale your game globally as well. Now to talk a little bit more about these 4 things, I'd love to invite Sahil, who leads gaming for Google Cloud, to talk a little bit more. Thank you. And if there are any questions, we'll take it after the session.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Naman. I know Naman kind of impressed upon the importance of localization, but what we decided to do was go a little deep and zoom in and see what these 4 categories and 4 dimensions mean for developers and publishers. So, I mean, localization is just not language and seasonality changes. We see a lot of effort the top developers are putting in content moderation, creating FAQ, creating service chatbots, and virtual onboarding co-pilots, right? These are the things that really help people from new markets to get onboarded quickly on the game. The second part is rapid prototyping. Prototyping obviously is the heart of any fast iteration that you want to do. And there's like a bunch of tools which are already available now. And with AI, we see a lot of acceleration in some of the work that is happening here, especially things like being able to create 2D, 3D assets quickly in the art style that you want. And we'll talk a little bit more about it. Creating sound, creating regression tests for new markets and seeing how are people, responding to some of the progressions in the stage, and then just play testing. Again, something that we will kind of speak a little bit more about as we proceed. Personalization, and people kind of mix it with localization sometimes, but personalization is the future. There's a lot of interesting stuff which is happening here, and personalization does not just mean giving a fancy, profile pic or whatever to your players. Today it means a lot more. It means really understanding your customer by dividing it into micro segments, recommending things like deck, character, equipment based on those micro segments, right? And then obviously you can go a step further. You can do IAP, add recommendation based on those segments, right? But what's really cool and what started happening is creating virtual co-pilots by personalizing them to, how the user, kind of perceives himself or herself in the virtual environment. So if I'm a player and I, want to be in a certain way, I can give those commands, and the virtual co-pilot that I have for the game will kind of interact with me in that same, tone, in those, with those nuances. That is really setting the top developers away from some of the other laggards in the industry. And the fourth, but one of the most important part is the user experience part. And when we say user experience, it kind of means, again, multiple things. But if I am a player playing a global game, I want that global user experience. I want the console level experience, but I also want to be in a battlefield which is global. I don't want to be playing with people only from my locality. I want to be playing with the best people globally. And how do you then provide that seamless experience to your global audience? I may be sitting in US wanting to play with a player in India, right? How do you get that low-level latency user experience going in that sort of a setup, right? With all the limitations that we have from an infra perspective. That is, what really sets the top developers apart from, the others. So we kind of try to take some inspiration here from some of the top global services. There are services like YouTube, Facebook, Insta, which are already kind of running these live services for some time. So there's a lot to learn. And I think this is going to be the next phase where the top developers are going to run their games like a live service. And 2 things kind of came out very, very strongly. The first part is, the companies which run large global live services, they are able to leverage AI to drive localization, accelerate product development. and build these new user experiences. So you're essentially using AI to do a lot of your legwork. And second is, how you need to have one singular view of your player, your infra, your business. And you should be able to overlay all of that to be able to have one view of your business, right? These are the two top things that set any global run game, apart from everything else. And, some quick examples of what we've already seen, AI for prototyping localization is available here and now, so it's not something which is available in the future, distant future. You can already do some cool styling. Already, I think all of you must have dabbled with like a bunch of text-to-image tools where you can use very specific art styles or images and then create some, images in a very quick manner. The second part, which is also very interesting and which is kind of not fairly well known, is you can quickly lay over a style on any scene and create very interesting, scenes very, very quickly. So, very simple example, you have a style and you have an image of, say, a Google Office, and you were able to overlay that into a very, quick scene creation that you can do. The next part is music generation. You can start creating music, IP-free music using LLM tools for music. And then I think the next frontier is really, while you can do all of these things during the development phase, but the next frontier is really you being able to do all of this in live. What that opens up is then you're creating personalized environments on the fly for your users, right? So imagine that. You're not building all of that. You're not pre-building all of that. You're building that on the fly with real-time AI. And we released some cool things this year, and I'm going to talk about that. So just a quick summary. That is not it. We're going to see some very, very interesting things come out, and I'm going to give you a quick preview of it. But we're seeing dynamic in-game content coming, smart NPCs, AI-based game testing, and all of this is going to help you launch your game in newer markets and global markets much faster. Some quick examples of cool stuff that Google released this year. The first one is Genie. I don't know if you've seen this paper, but essentially this is a large language model, LLM model, which was trained on millions of hours of game viewing. Basically what this did is it understood what next frame to generate based on the user input that you're getting. So you could create very quickly a side scroller kind of a game just by giving a few prompts. It's still in research, but very cool. And then we kind of flipped it over and created an agent. So all the playtesting that you do manually today, or maybe use some AI, Google kind of released an AI agent, which was able to be put into a game with a specific task. So you give a task, you say this is what you are, and this is what you need to finish. And then when it was trained over, some of the top of line games, it was able to go and finish those tasks. Now this opens up like a variety of possibilities for you. You can use this for playtesting, you can use this for simulation, you can use this as bots in your games. So again, very interesting. Some cool stuff that some of our partners are doing. We have a partner, Replica Studios, who built a bunch of NPCs that you can today integrate into your game. And I want to give you a quick glimpse of some of the stuff that they're already doing.
there, my friend. We have lost. A goblin stole my socks. Beware the great goblins!
Yeah, I mean, living games, that's what we call it, because you can already see, the kind of stuff that you can immediately integrate into your games with these NPCs. I want to give you one more example to make it even more real. We work with a partner called CSM, and they built this platform which helps you generate 3D models from either images, text, or sketches. Again, very cool stuff, and very relevant for what you guys do. So you see, I mean, there are some fairly advanced capabilities here, and I am by no means saying this will replace, some of the stuff that we need to do in terms of hard work, but this helps you get to the prototyping stage very, very quickly. And this is why we want to talk about some of this stuff here, because if you are building for a global market, if you are building or launching in newer markets, what you want to do is iterate very, very quickly, right? And that is only possible if you can do some of these things fast, right? If you want to take several months on the design side, for you to be able to test some of these things, it's going to take much longer. This is what AI kind of brings to you now, and these are all things which are available as of now. Kind of moving on, right? Which is the second part of, the big takeaway that we had, which was, when you build for one market, I think you know your constraints very well. But the moment you change your constraints to, or you're building for the global market, right, you need to fundamentally reevaluate what are the technology decisions that you've taken. A database that may work, say, for an India market very well, may not scale if you have a user in US. Your game servers, should you be hosting them in India? Should you be hosting them in LATAM? What are the latencies that you will get? How the matchmaking will work? How will you do ranking of players? Some of these things will require fundamental reevaluation of all the decisions that you've taken when you built it for one market, which is where we encourage developers who are kind of making that progression to kind of look at things from like multiple lenses. It also forces you to kind of relook at your game as a service, because then you're essentially saying, okay, this is the gameplay, this is the main storyline, and then I should be able to use this in interesting ways in a bunch of different territories, right? The other thing is, how do you do local relevant recommendations for a global market? How do you do matchmaking? And it's not simple matchmaking. There's a multivariant matchmaking logic that you will have to create, because you may have users wanting to play with users across the globe, right? So one of the criteria that you will then have to think is, how will the latency and how will the experience look like? Communities, right? The context changes, meaning changes. You may run moderation rooms today to be able to control what people can talk. But again, if you were to just flip the paradigm and think, what means one thing in, say, India means a totally different thing in a different market. How do you run global communities in such a way that everybody feels safe? And then, Some of the other things which become table stakes are how do you do limitless scalability? You know your traffic patterns in India, but you may not know your traffic patterns as you start scaling globally. Then live operations, uptime, stability. So all of these things you need to start fundamentally reevaluating them and thinking, how do I change, or how will each one of them change as I move from one market to another? And my last slide here, but basically I wanted to leave you with some of the things that we have done in this domain with some of our users, with the largest publishers, right? So game servers, I know we are used to deploying game servers in a certain way. There are capabilities available today which allow you to do global deployment of your game servers so that you're able to offer the best experience and then scale them in the minimum time so that your cost is also completely under control. Then databases, you need to start thinking about global databases for games which have a backend, right? If you have your auth service, some of your other services which require database intervention, you cannot have databases sitting in one location and serving global environments. You need to think what are the global databases that you can have access to and which you can use for your game. And then analytics, I know enough's been said about it, but it is fundamentally the most important component of your game. It allows you to overlay your user feedback, your infrastructure and your business, and to be able to see that in all the three lenses. That's very important, and that's what we've seen some of the top game studios and publishers do. That's it. Feel free to reach out to Naman or me. We are going to be hanging around today and tomorrow here. Thank you so much. Lovely chatting with you.